The clock on the living room wall ticked softly, its sound echoing through the stillness of the house. The night outside was calm, a faint drizzle tapping against the windowpane, painting silver streaks on the glass. The world seemed to be asleep, but Martha sat awake, her thoughts moving quietly through the corridors of memory. She wasn't a woman who liked noise. Silence had been her closest companion since her husband passed away 3 years ago. She had learned to live in it, to make peace with the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the wind, and the emptiness of rooms once filled with laughter. Yet sometimes, silence was too honest. It revealed what the heart tried to hide. On the coffee table beside her lay an unfinished jigsaw puzzle. Martha had been working on it for days, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it gave her something to fix, a pattern to complete when everything else felt scattered. She reached for a piece and turned it between her fingers. Her eyes soft but distant. Upstairs, her son Ethan was still awake too, though she didn't know it. His light had been on since evening, his music faint enough to blend with the rain. He had grown quieter over the past year, and Martha had convinced herself it was just part of growing up. But a mother always feels when something deeper lingers beneath the silence. She sighed and looked toward the staircase. Maybe he's studying, she whispered to herself. Though she didn't quite believe it, her gaze drifted toward a framed photograph on the wall, a picture from years ago, taken at the lake. Ethan was about 12 then, laughing so hard his face was scrunched up. Water splashing around him as he tried to push his father off the dock. Martha smiled faintly. That laughter had been the soundtrack of her world once. Now was only a memory she played in her mind when the nights felt too long. The rain began to fall harder. A gentle rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, low and distant. Martha stood and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. There was a chill in the air that didn't come from the contentants. I didn't come from the weather, a kind of loneliness that lived in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. She walked to the window and watched the lights of the small town shimmer in the distance. Somewhere out there, life was happening, couples walking home under umbrellas, laughter spilling from cafes, dreams being made in small, hidden places. And here she was, in her warm but quiet house, surrounded by the memories of what used to be. There was something she never told anyone, not even Ethan. It wasn't a secret of guilt or regret. It was simply a wish to feel needed again, not in a dramatic or desperate way, but in the gentle, ordinary sense of being part of someone's world, of having someone look for her voice when they were lost, of being the place where another heart came to rest. Martha didn't crave excitement or adventure. She craved connection, the kind that filled the silence without words. She thought of how Ethan used to come into her room as a child, his small footsteps echoing down the hallway whenever he had a bad dream. He would whisper, "Mom, can I sleep here?" and crawl into her arms before she could answer. Those nights were long gone, but the memory of them lingered like the scent of rain on the earth, faint, familiar, and comforting. The clock ticked again, a soft, steady rhythm marking the passage of another hour. Martha sat back down, her hands resting on her lap, and closed her eyes for a moment. In the distance, she thought she heard a door creak, maybe Ethan's, but she didn't move. She told herself she was imagining things. Still, a quiet feeling stirred inside her, the same feeling that had followed her all week. Something wasn't right. Ethan had been smiling less. His words were shorter, his eyes a little more distant. Every time she asked how he was, he answered quickly, almost rehearsed, "I'm fine, Mom." But she could feel it, that tiny tremor beneath his calm voice, the ache of someone carrying too much alone. Martha opened her eyes and stared at the soft glow of the lamp beside her. It cast a warm golden light across the room, falling on the family photographs, the worn sofa, the folded blanket she'd been meaning to wash. Everything looked peaceful, but the air felt heavy, as if the house itself was waiting for something to happen outside. Lightning flickered briefly, illuminating the trees in a silver flash before darkness settled again. The rain softened, returning to a gentle rhythm, and then she heard it. A quiet knock. 3 gentle taps at her bedroom door. She froze, her heart giving a small, startled jump. It was late, far past midnight. For a moment, she wondered if she'd imagined it. But then she heard his voice, faint and unsure. "Mom?" Martha's breath caught. She turned toward the sound, her voice soft but trembling slightly. "Yes, Ethan." There was a pause. Then the door opened slowly. Ethan stood there, his hair tousled, his face pale, his eyes glistening as if he'd been holding something in for far too long. "Can we talk?" he whispered. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, seeing her son standing in the doorway with the same uncertain look he had as a little boy, Martha knew, deep in her chest, that something inside him had quietly broken. She nodded gently, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft, patient, endless, as if the night itself was listening. Ethan sat quietly on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly together. The small bedside lamp cast a warm circle of light between him and his mother, filling the room with a calm, golden stillness. Outside, the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle, the rhythmic sound mingling with the hush of the night. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Martha waited, patient and steady, giving him space to find his words. Finally, Ethan drew in a deep breath and said softly, "Mom, do you ever think about the past? About people who used to mean everything and then somehow don't anymore?" The question lingered in the air, quiet and fragile. Martha looked at him with tender curiosity. "Yes," she replied gently. "I think everyone carries echoes of people they once knew." Ethan nodded, his eyes lowering to the floor. "There's someone I can't stop thinking about," he said. Even after all this time, he didn't have to say her name yet. The emotion in his voice already told her this was about Lily, the girl who used to visit their home, who laughed easily and brought warmth wherever she went. Martha remembered the sound of her laughter, light, kind, genuine. She remembered how Ethan's face would quietly brighten when she walked into the room. Ethan's voice trembled slightly as he began to speak again, his words painting the story of how it all began. It was spring, that soft, golden season where the air feels like new beginnings. Ethan had been working part-time at the small bookstore downtown, the kind that smelled of paper, dust, and quiet dreams. Lily came in one afternoon, searching for a book she couldn't quite remember the title of. He had helped her look for it, not because he had to, but because her voice had a warmth that made the simplest request sound like music. They spent nearly an hour walking through the aisles, guessing titles, sharing stories, and laughing when they couldn't find the right one. When she finally remembered it, "The Wind Through the Pines," he found it tucked between 2 old poetry books. She had smiled at him then. That kind of smile that feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. From that day, she kept coming back. Sometimes to buy a book, sometimes just to talk. Their friendship grew quietly, without grand gestures or confessions. It was in the small things. The way she'd bring him coffee on rainy days. The way he'd set aside a book she might like. The way they'd sit by the window during slow evenings, talking about everything and nothing. There was no rush, no expectation, just 2 hearts learning the rhythm of being understood. Ethan paused, his gaze distant as the memories returned. "I don't even know when I started liking her," he admitted. "It just happened. Like one day she was a friend, and the next she was part of my thoughts even when she wasn't around." Martha smiled faintly, her heart aching with understanding. "That's how love often begins, quietly, without asking for permission." He nodded. "It was simple then, easy. She used to say that talking to me felt like being in a safe place. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Lily had to move away for college to a different city hours away. At first they promised to stay in touch, and they did for a while. Messages, calls, little updates about their days. But slowly, life began to stretch the distance between them. Ethan would stare at his phone sometimes, typing messages and deleting them, unsure of what to say that didn't sound too hopeful or too afraid. "I guess I didn't realize how much she meant to me until she was gone," he whispered. Martha listened, her expression soft. "Sometimes love leaves gently," she said. "Not because it stops, but because time asks it to wait." Ethan looked up at her, eyes glistening in the lamplight. "It's strange. I still remember the sound of her laugh. I can't remember what we talked about that last time she visited, but I remember how it felt like everything was about to change." He ran his hands through his hair and exhaled slowly. "After she left, I tried to focus on school, on work. But something inside me stayed quiet, like a door I couldn't close or open." Martha reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "You don't have to close it," she said softly. "Some doors stay open because they hold the lessons of who we were." He gave a small, broken smile. "Do you ever wish you could go back, Mom? Just to one day that made you feel alive?" Martha's gaze drifted to the window. The reflection of the rain shimmered in the glass, and for a moment, her own memories stirred. Of her late husband, of laughter in a kitchen that no longer echoed, of dreams they once shared. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "But I've learned that the past isn't meant to be lived again. It's meant to be remembered kindly." Ethan looked down, silent but calmer. The heaviness in the room softened. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The night was clear again, the moonlight spilling across the floor. Martha squeezed his hand lightly. "The people who truly shape us never really leave, Ethan," she whispered. "They become part of how we see the world, part of what makes us gentle." For the first time in weeks, Ethan smiled. It wasn't a wide or certain smile, but it was real, and in that quiet room, with only the sound of the clock marking the moment, Martha knew that the echoes of Ethan's past, though painful, were also the first soft notes of healing. The morning light poured through the curtains, soft and golden, touching everything in Martha's kitchen with quiet warmth. The rain from the night before had left the world washed and calm, the kind of morning that feels like a new beginning. Though no one says it out loud, Ethan sat at the table, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked tired but lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth the night before had opened a small window in his heart. Martha moved around the kitchen, humming softly, pretending not to notice the quiet restlessness in his eyes. She knew he was thinking, and that thinking for Ethan often meant remembering. "Are you going to work today?" she asked gently. He blinked out of his thoughts. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I might stop by the bookstore, too. I haven't been there in a while." Martha smiled knowingly. "The same one where you met her." He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Yeah, I guess I just want to see it again. It feels like that place still remembers something I don't." She didn't press further. Sometimes hearts find their own way back to the places that once held them. The bookstore hadn't changed much. The same bell jingled softly when Ethan opened the door. The same scent, books, dust, and a hint of old coffee filled the air. The same narrow aisles lined with stories that had seen countless people come and go. Ethan ran his fingers across the spines of books as he walked, memories blooming like quiet echoes. He could almost hear her laughter again, the way she used to tease him about his habit of alphabetizing the shelves twice. He smiled to himself and turned down the aisle near the poetry section. And then he stopped. Someone stood there, a woman, holding a familiar paperback in her hands. The same book Lily had once searched for, The Wind Through the Pines. His breath caught for just a second. She turned slightly, her hair catching the light, her expression calm but thoughtful. And when her eyes lifted, meeting his, time seemed to fold quietly between them. "Ethan," she said softly. He hadn't heard her voice in years, yet it sounded exactly the same, steady, kind, warm. "Lily," he managed, his voice almost a whisper. For a moment, they both just stood there, not as people from a long-ago story, but as two souls recognizing something familiar. The world didn't rush, and neither did they. Lily smiled faintly. "It's been a while." He nodded. "Yeah, a long while." They walked to the small cafe next door, the same one where they used to sit after work. The owner recognized Ethan immediately and brought over 2 mugs of tea without asking. It felt strangely natural, as if the years in between were just a brief intermission. "So," Lily said, stirring her tea slowly, "what have you been up to?" "Mostly work. And trying to figure things out," Ethan replied. "You," she smiled. "The same. Life's quieter than I expected. I guess I learned that sometimes peace feels lonelier than it should." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. There was no awkwardness, just the gentle rhythm of two people reacquainting themselves with the sound of each other's voice. After a pause, Lily looked down and said quietly, "I got your letter." Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. "You did?" She nodded, her eyes soft. "It took me a while to read it. I think I was afraid it would bring back too much. But when I finally did, it made me remember how kind you were, how much I missed having someone who just listened." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "I didn't know what else to do. I just needed you to know I was sorry for the silence, for the way things ended." Lily smiled gently, her gaze meeting his. "I know, and I forgave you long before that letter. I just didn't know how to say it." Outside, the sunlight shifted, spilling through the cafe window and warming their table. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some apologies live in the quiet between words. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It's strange. I thought seeing you again would make everything confusing, but it doesn't. It feels right. Just different." Lily nodded. "That's because we're different now. We grew up, Ethan. We learned how to carry things without letting them break us." He smiled, not the nervous, uncertain smile of before, but a real one. "You always had a way of saying the right thing." She looked out the window, a soft expression crossing her face. "Maybe I just learned to listen better." When they left the cafe, the air was cool and bright. The trees along the street swayed gently in the breeze, their branches scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk. For a moment, it almost felt like they were walking through an old photograph, one where nothing hurt and everything was possible again, at the corner. Lily turned to him. "I should get going," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but thank you for this." She smiled, the same sunlight-y smile he remembered. "Maybe we'll talk again soon." And then she was gone, walking away down the street, her figure fading gently into the morning light. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her go. There was no sadness this time, no sharp ache of loss, only a calm, lingering warmth. The kind that stays behind when something once unfinished finally finds peace. When he returned home that evening, Arthur was sitting on the porch, waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. The quiet, content look on his face told her everything. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching lightly. "Was it good to see her?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, his voice warm. "It was more than good, Mom. It was healing." Martha nodded, her eyes gentle. "Then maybe that's what tonight was meant to be. Not about going back, but moving forward with grace." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan finally felt it. That subtle peace that comes when the heart learns how to remember without hurting. The evening sky was brushed with soft shades of pink and gold when Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The world felt unusually quiet, as if the air itself had paused to listen. The wooden boards beneath his feet creaked softly, and somewhere in the distance a train horn echoed faintly. Martha was already there, sitting on the swing with a blanket over her knees. She turned when she heard him approach, her expression warm and knowing. "You've been quiet since you got home," she said. "Was it difficult?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "Not difficult," he replied. "Just different." "It's strange, Mom. I thought I'd still be holding on to something, but I think I finally let it go today." Martha studied him for a moment. There was something new in his eyes, not sadness, but a calm maturity that hadn't been there before. He sat down beside her, and for a while they simply listened to the soft hum of crickets and the gentle sway of the swing. The golden light faded into evening blue, wrapping them in the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet but steady. "I told Lily the truth today," he said. about how I'd carried guilt for the way we ended things. I told her I thought about her more than I wanted to admit, and that I wasn't sure if it was love or just what love taught me. Ah! Martha turned to him, her eyes kind. And what did she say? He smiled faintly. She said maybe it doesn't have to be either. Maybe it's just gratitude for what was and for what helped us grow. There was peace in his voice, the kind that comes after long restlessness. Martha nodded, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She's a wise girl, he said softly. Ethan looked down at his hands, turning his mug of tea slowly. She told me something else too. She said that sometimes we meet people who change us, not because they stay, but because they remind us how to feel again. Martha felt the words settle deep within her. For a moment, she thought of her own past, of her late husband, of laughter in the kitchen, of the gentle steadiness of love that had once filled her days. She smiled faintly. She's right, she whispered. That's what love does, Ethan. It doesn't always promise forever. Sometimes it just promises to make us more human. Later that night, after dinner, Ethan went to his room. He sat by the window where the moonlight spilled across his desk, turning the pages of an old journal. Inside were notes, letters, and thoughts he'd written during the months after Lily left, words he'd never shared, emotions he'd never quite understood until now. He read through them slowly, feeling the ache and the tenderness of who he used to be. Then, with a quiet sigh, he closed the notebook and set it aside. Not in sadness, but in peace. He picked up his phone, hesitated, and then typed a short message to Lily. Thank you for today, and for everything we once shared. I wish you all the happiness you bring to others. He didn't wait for a reply. Some messages aren't sent to be answered. They're sent to complete a circle that was left open too long. He put the phone down, drew the curtains slightly, and looked out at the stars. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the pull of what was missing, only the quiet fullness of what remained. In the living room, Martha folded the last of the laundry and smiled when she saw the light go off in Ethan's room. She felt a warmth inside, not the fierce kind of happiness, but the soft, content one that mothers carry when they know their children are finding their way. She sat for a while, thinking about the years behind her, about how life changes shape but never stops offering lessons. Love, she realized, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about learning when to let go, gently, kindly. Without bitterness, she thought of Ethan as a little boy, running barefoot through the yard, laughing without fear of the future. And she thought of him now grown thoughtful, learning to forgive himself and the world around him. When she finally turned off the lights and went to her room, she paused at the door, the same door Ethan had knocked on just one night before. It amazed her how a single moment could change so much. How a quiet conversation could turn pain into understanding, distance into connection, and silence into peace. The next morning arrived softly. The first light of dawn filled the house with gold. The rain had washed everything clean, and the garden outside glistened with dew. Martha stood by the window, her coffee warm in her hands. Ethan joined her a moment later, still sleepy but smiling. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice light. "Morning, sweetheart," she replied. They didn't need to say anything more. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left unsaid. Just the quiet comfort of knowing they'd both grown together and apart. Through grief, memory, and love that had transformed rather than faded. Ethan glanced out the window. He said softly, "I used to think that letting go meant losing someone. But maybe it just means keeping the good parts, the ones that stay no matter what." Martha smiled, her eyes misting just a little. "Exactly," she said. "The best parts never really leave us. They just change where they live." Outside, a bird began to sing, its song simple and clear. The day stretched open, full of gentle promise, and in that golden morning light, mother and son stood side by side, both quietly grateful for the love that had come, the lessons it had given, and the peace it finally left behind.